لوغوس تي في. أن نحضر كل إنسان كاملا في المسيح يسوع.
Our dear viewers, welcome to Logos TV, Coptic Civilization Program. I'm Michael Saad. Our episode today on serving refugees in Europe, and our guest is Suzie Abdou. Welcome, Suzie.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saad.
It's a great honor for me and pleasure to host you second time on Coptic Civilization.
Thank you. It's kind of you. I'm happy to be here.
Suzie is a policy analyst and international development specialist with experience in democracy, governance, and gender in the Middle East and North Africa. In addition to being a regular contributor to National Public Radio, Huffington Post, and other online and news television programs, Suzie has also led a service mission to the refugees and refugee camps in Greece, Serbia, and France. Among other things, Suzie is Security Fellow with the Truman National Security Project and their Los Angeles chapter co-director. She is a member of the Pacific Council on International Policy. She was a 2017 Franklin Fellow with the U.S. Department of State Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs.
Thank you.
Suzie is also has received 2 master's degrees, one in international relations from University of California, Riverside, and another master's degree in theology from the Balmond University, which belongs to the Antiochian Orthodox Church in Lebanon. My goodness, this is a lot. We can talk forever, not just this is the second interview with you. We can imagine many interviews in the future just to cover some of that.
I always enjoy talking to you, Dr. Saad, so anytime.
Okay. In last episode, we covered your service in the International Democratic Institute in the Parliament of Jordan. We talked about your trips to Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, and Egypt in search of helping local displaced refugees and other groups. And of course, Jordan was to help build up cadre of young people, staff to the members of parliament, and so on. Big, complex activities. Today, we'll talk about your ministry in Europe.
Yes.
What brought you to that ministry? You just woke up one morning and took a flight to Europe, or how did it happen?
It was close. I had repatriated from Jordan back to the United States.
Yes.
And it was at the height of the refugee crisis in Europe. A good friend of mine, a Christian in the Protestant tradition, had said he was going to Europe to do a needs assessment, their initial needs assessment, when the crisis broke out. And he said, I asked him, could I go for a couple of weeks? I'm back. I haven't started a new job yet. And he said, well, let me submit your name to the organization, which is a Christian organization based out of Tennessee. Nashville, Tennessee, called Servant Group International, and their service is with Muslim populations around the world. And they have services in Iraq and Mosul with schools for children, and now services in Greece, long-term services for the refugees. So he submitted my name, and they called me and said, how would you like to go for 6 months? And I said, that's a long time, I need to start work again. And they said, okay, 3 months. And so I came back with 2 months, and we agreed. So just a couple of weeks, I went out to visit them in Nashville, met one of the women who is actually Iraqi Kurd. She had converted from Islam to Christianity and had been a refugee herself from Iran. And she was one of the members of the group. I met her. We talked about what we were going to do, which was incredibly vague at the time. God really led the service. But we had kind of a vague idea of what was required of us. I took another youth from St. Mary's who had just left her job in Washington, D.C., Giselle Suriel, and we took off a couple of weeks later to Europe.
3 women leaving the United States and going to Europe to serve the refugees of the Middle East, who or most of them came through boats, etc.
Yes.
And you don't know what was the agenda.
Not
you just
really.
let yourself be servants of God day by day.
Correct.
Wow.
Correct. Yes, we were just told, find out what kinds of programs are needed, especially long-term programs. As you know, refugees their issues are complex and they're long-term. They're not resolved very easy. So we weren't looking for short-term things to do, like getting them food or clothes, but long-term, what would they need? And so that was the only mandate we had, and to just go to Greece.
Yeah.
And then God led us to other countries as we were there.
What was going on in your mind overnight before flying to Europe? How did you dream? What was kind of dreams, thoughts, fears, worries, peace? You thought you are the Good Samaritan and just let things happen? I mean, what was inspiring you and giving you the strength to go out of the box?
Right. The opportunity is what motivates. You know, this opportunity to serve a different population of people.
Yeah.
You know, in our last segment together, I had talked about service in the church, and then a very formal way of serving out in the Middle East. I had guidelines, I had a job description, I knew what I needed to do. But this was very, very kind of loose mandate. So the opportunity was exciting. I was also afraid because I didn't know where to start. I was the lead on the mission, and I thought, between the fears and the worries and the excitement, it was just, God, please let us know what we're going to do for 2 months, because we're going to land in Greece and then just figure it out. We didn't even know where to go except the apartment we rented. And so it was really keep us safe and make use of us so we're not wasting days trying to figure out what to do, so that I also served the group in Tennessee that had entrusted me with the service. So it was tricky in the beginning.
Amazing. So a Protestant organization in Tennessee
Yes.
recruiting 2 Coptic Orthodox ladies from California to join a Kurdish convert, refugee, to go to Europe and serve Muslims, Christians of the Middle East who fled by boat or by train or by bus.
Correct.
And happened to be somewhere in Greece, France, Serbia, etc.
Yes.
Amazing. No comment. No comment. I'm speechless, actually. I'm saying no comment because there are no words that would describe this.
Right, but you know, and by God's grace and divine wisdom, He made it all work, because we each had different skills that complemented one another. We were also different ages, so the health of each person helped in different ways, and the language skills. Because Nehed, who was the convert that was with us, she was an older woman, was in remission from cancer. So health-wise, she remained in Greece the entire time as Giselle and I traveled. And then there were areas Giselle traveled to, being 25, 26 years old, where I said, I'm not going there. The conditions are too harsh. And then Nehed, over time, had learned multiple languages. So she spoke Farsi, she spoke Kurdish, she spoke Arabic. And so it helped tremendously that she was able to speak these, and it was a wonderful way to minister to refugees, that they saw their own kind speaking their language, but the Muslims saw that she was a bold convert and was unafraid to speak to them in their language and about Christ.
So Nihad, you expect a refugee who arrived to the United States and got settled to stay quiet.
Correct.
But for she to go back to serve the refugees, yes, while declaring that she converted to Christianity and serve the refugees from both religions, and each religion has its own fractions as well,
yes,
or factions, is quite bold, is quite courageous. But she was, I get amazed with converts. They have unbelievable energy,
yes,
and they serve in ways outside the box that we are used to.
yes.
I mean, if a servant goes and serves in the villages, in our communities, we say, wow. But she is going to the battlefield, to the front line, yes, because these refugees, not all of them are peaceful. Some are peaceful, some are not. Even 1/10 of 1% violent can cause her trouble.
Correct. Correct. She was in a far more dangerous position than we were. But she was fearless. It's almost like she didn't have any idea that there could be, and when she did, it didn't bother her at all. And so it was really humbling for those of us that are cradle Orthodox to see just the passion, the fervor, the belief of a convert.
Yes.
It's
so
humbling.
did you watch Boats?
We did, and I have many pictures I'd like to share with you.
Please, yes.
So we'll begin with the first picture here. So if the control room could show the first picture, please. And so there it is. This is serving the refugees in Europe. This is not a photograph that I took myself, but it's a very common photograph. And it's very much what we experienced ourselves when we were there. So that everyone is aware of how this happens. We'll actually
So you actually were there?
Yes.
My goodness.
Yes,
my
we were there.
goodness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You should write a book about this.
There are people who did far more than I did who should be writing the books. I got very lucky to do as much as I did. It was a blessing.
You have stories. I'm curious about the rest of your story.
Many stories.
Yeah, please.
So moving on, we'll start with Greece, which is the first country that we came to and we were mandated to go to, because it's where the majority of refugees had gone. And so I was actually present for this event. If you could see all the way in the background, there is a boat of refugees. The route of refugees from Syria and Iraq would be that they would walk on foot with human smugglers that they would pay thousands of euros to take them by foot all the way to the south of Turkey. So from Syria and Iraq, they would walk. It would take them 2-3 months to get to the south of Turkey. And from there, they would pay human smugglers again 1,600 euro per adult, 1,300 euro per child to get on the equivalent of a dinghy, a raft that shouldn't take more than 6 people. They would pack with 40 people. There would be no one to navigate the boat. They would put vests on each person, which we'll talk about, because they weren't always life vests. And they would give a knife to one of the men on the boat. And they would tell him, once you get out to a certain point, it was really 9 kilometers between Turkey and the island of Lesbos, Greece. They said, slash the boat. When you start to sink, the Greeks have to rescue you. Based on EU law, you'll be in the EU and they have to take you in as refugees. And so when people couldn't afford to go during the daytime, they would go at night, which is very dangerous. It's pitch black. It was freezing cold. We were there in January and February of 2016. And you would get people who would be in this man's condition, hypothermia. This is an elderly refugee. He'd been on the boat for at least 3 days by the time he reached the shore, he had hypothermia, like many others. The man who is cradling him is a volunteer doctor, and we would have dry clothes for them, whatever we could. As volunteers, we would also stand on the shore and wave our orange vests so that the men on the boat would know to try and steer the boat towards the shore, and that we had aid for them when they got there. And so it was a very troubling sight.
So that was your first service, is to guide, to be like a, what do you call it, light, harbor light.
Like a beacon.
The beacon to tell them, come here.
Right, right.
Yes, come here, all ye laden.
And we will give you rest.
And give you rest.
Christ will give you rest.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so in this picture, which brings me to the conversation, this is another volunteer who was helping a young girl whose family couldn't afford the life vest. So they used rope and styrofoam to strap it to the young girl, so in case she fell into the water, she would float. What we came to find out is that many of these vests had been slashed open and filled with cardboard instead of buoyant material. And then they would be sold at the regular price of a regular life vest by the smugglers to the refugees. And if they fell off the boat and they sank, but they made the money that they were out to make.
Yeah.
And so when some of the refugees figured that out, they would strap their children in styrofoam or themselves in styrofoam. Even in that 9-kilometer distance, many people died in the water.
Yeah, definitely.
Thousands that we couldn't help.
Definitely, yeah.
Yes.
So where did you go next?
So I will take you through our travels throughout Greece, which was the majority of our time. In this picture, what we would do every day as volunteers is that massive stretch of beach. We would then go and collect all of the abandoned items, things people couldn't carry anymore. We found pictures, we found passports, we found personal hygiene items, clothing that people couldn't carry anymore, and of course the dinghies that had been slashed that needed to be cleaned. In the next picture, you'll see that there were actually landfills that the Greeks created just so they could put the amount of life vests we collected to get them off of the shore. So there were massive landfills like this that were filled to the top just to clear out the area. And that just gives you an idea of the magnitude of the crisis. People were fleeing in the thousands to the border of Turkey, and that created a crisis for Turkey as well.
Why they didn't stay in Turkey?
Turkey doesn't want them.
Yeah, but Turkey shipped them to Europe?
Correct.
Yeah.
They made pretty much a deal to ship them to Europe.
Yeah.
You know, this crisis is quite political.
Yes.
And Turkey was given billions of dollars, and with the billions of dollars, they sent them to Europe.
Yeah.
It was a very sad situation.
It's a complex
Incredibly.
topic with so much political and economic and maybe religious motivations.
Yes.
We will not end talking about it, but you and I want to talk about the Christian attitude that actually drove you to go and motivated you to go to Europe to do this.
Yes.
The Good Samaritan model. But I also, if I may,
Please.
Read what Christ has said in the the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, about describing the spiritual characterization of helping the weak. Yes. And I'm sure you will relate to each item of these, because the refugees represent many of these items that Christ praised, described the scene at the end of times. Christ said, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory, and before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungered. It was not my choice. I was hungered, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when we saw thee hungered and fed thee, thirsty and gave you drink? When saw we thee a stranger and took thee in, or naked and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick or in prison and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, you have done it unto me.
Yes.
Any of these weak individuals that Christ described, the homeless, the naked, the hungry, the thirsty, the imprisoned, and the likes, are represented in the refugees groups.
All of them.
All of them.
All of them.
And you were there, right? Can we call it battlefront?
It was a battlefront. Yes. Yes, it was.
So that motivates people who go to help or to accept them in their homelands.
Yes.
Or in their homes or in their churches.
Yes.
So tell us more. You have the stories. I just wanted to get the perspective of the Christian, the gospel, what the gospel tells us in this situation. What is the spiritual meaning? Why God allows this to happen, and where do we go from there? Yeah, please.
You know, God gives you the opportunity, right?
Yes.
There is a saying by one of the fathers that says, one of the modern fathers out of, I believe, Russia. And he says, when the hungry extends his hand to you, it's not because he wants food. He's offering you the kingdom of heaven. And so this is an opportunity to do as the Good Samaritan parable tells us, which is if someone is on the side of the road and in need, you don't criticize or assess the situation based on that person's religion, what they look like, what city they come from. Your only responsibility is to care for another person, to see their humanity and to see Christ in them and their potential, which is really, Nahed was ahead of us in that. She saw the potential for Christ to be in the heart of every person that was a refugee. And that was really humbling for me and to learn from her. But my responsibility was to go there to see that this is a massive humanitarian crisis, the second crisis since World War II, of this migrant crisis, of this magnitude since World War II, and there was an opportunity to help. So you go help.
As they say, opportunities are not created. Opportunities are seized.
Right. That's correct.
So, like this case, we did not create the opportunity of the kingdom of heaven for us, but it happened by some history. Some political actions ended up with the opportunity that the refugees are before us, and we can either help or watch, like the Good Samaritan story. There were people who watched, people who helped.
Yes.
And I'm so curious about the rest of your story.
Sure. In this next picture, there was this young Yazidi boy. I don't remember his name. Much has fled my memory. But his brother was in Germany. He was looking for him because they were going to be reunited. And we were in France at the time. We received word from friends in Greece who said, have you seen this boy? He must be in one of these major locations. After much discussion between a lot of the volunteers, there was a boat of children that sank on December 3rd of 2015. So 2 months prior to our having been in Europe. And his name wasn't on the list of the children who'd passed, who had drowned. Eventually we found out that his name was just missed and he had actually died on December 3rd, and they had to give his brother the sad news. But this missing Yazidi boy, I believe, was only 14 years old. Everyone on that boat was a child, no more than maybe a preteen, early teens. And so we had many of these, and what you see below in the picture is actually, I tried to create a collage, were actually his papers when he entered Turkey, and that's all we had to identify him. In the next picture, there was an area in Greece called Moria, and they had taken, the Greeks had taken a camp, actually an empty prison, an abandoned prison, and given it to the mainly Afghani refugees that were in that part of Lesvos. They gave them rooms, the cells, former inmate cells to sleep in, and the men slept outside in these conditions. This pool that you see in the picture under the tree was the only source of water they had. It's dirty water. And there were British volunteers that brought blankets, and the men would put the blankets over the mud and sleep at night, but they would wake up with terrible colds, chest conditions from sleeping in the snow, essentially. There was rain and snow almost nightly. In the next picture, you'll see that the young men had lit some trash cans on fire just to keep warm. All the British refugees did their best to collect clothes from European donors, and the most that we could give them to eat were bananas and tea. So one of our services was to help them, bring them blankets and give them bananas and tea to keep them warm and have some sort of nutrition. There was also a UN station there that was giving out papers for refugees that made it into Greece. And so in the next picture, you'll see a father, a Syrian father with his 3 children waiting to register with the United Nations at the Moria camp. And there were many of these type that camped there. It would sometimes take 17 hours for them to be registered with the United Nations so that they would be able to get off of Lesvos Island and onto a ship that would take them to Athens, and they could continue their journey from Athens. This camp in the next picture was specifically for Syrian refugees who had priority at the time, because there are different kinds of refugee, there are different refugee categories or statuses. The people who have priority are the ones who are fleeing war, usually political refugees. Then there are economic refugees who we'll see in Athens that had fled because there simply isn't an opportunity to work or to find any kind of meaningful income to build their lives, and so they flee to other countries. Many of those are North African. We even met Egyptians along the way. But in this camp, which had been set up by the Red Cross, in the next picture, you'll see they had created a bank where they could charge their phones and keep in touch with their families. To them, their most valuable possession was their phone, so they could keep in touch. While we were going through the camp, in the next picture, we met Syrian Christian refugees. And what was interesting is there were only a handful of them. And this particular family, the man in the yellow jacket, he's the father. He was there with his wife, who I have my arm around. She's got the thick jacket. Their son, and they had another son at the time who was getting food from the Red Cross. To the very left is the wife of a priest who had come to serve with us, and she spoke Greek. She could basically navigate getting through the guards so we could get into the camps. But this particular father had been speaking to Nahed, who's there with the red lanyard, and Eleni, which is Helena in Greek. He had been speaking to them, and they said to me, Suzie, come here. I said, okay. The father went into this bin where they could sleep, and he said to me, come here. I want to show you something. I said, okay. So I went in, and he pushed his shirt a little bit aside, and he had a tattoo of St. George. And he said to me, we're Christian. And I said, that's amazing. And he said to me, I went to your monasteries in Egypt, and I went to the monastery of St. Anthony. And he opened his wallet, and he had a picture of St. Anthony in his wallet. And he was so happy to see that there was a Copt serving, because it was someone who understood their Christianity, their being Syriac Orthodox. And it was amazing. His son came in and showed me the cross tattoo, and we took some of the generous donations that we had collected by the grace of God from many Copts and others in America, and we had given them some money. We came to find out that the next day they were actually given asylum in Holland. So they're in the Netherlands now. Christian refugees were actually given a priority by Scandinavian and Northern European countries. And so now they're in the Netherlands, which we're quite grateful for. So in the next picture, what happens to the Christians on Lesbos Island is that they would get on these large ships, freight ships, and it would cost them about 75 euros a seat, no matter how old you are, and it would take you on a 12-hour trip to Athens, which was their next stop. So they'd get their papers from the UN, buy their ticket on the boat, and get to Athens. The refugees had heard about Victoria Square. There are several public squares in Athens, but Victoria Square was known to the refugees as where you go to get help. So along the way, we had met Christian groups. 99% of the groups helping the refugees were Christian from all over the world. And the refugees knew that it was the Christians helping. And we...
No petrodollars.
No, and only...
Or servants sent by rich petrodollars countries.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. We had maybe witnessed
But
two
the Good
Muslim
Samaritan
groups.
example is facing Christians. I mean, Christ, people who believed in Christ heard the Good Samaritan parable and felt committed and on call.
Correct.
And as you said, the opportunity to earn the kingdom of God.
That's right.
And represent as an ambassador of the kingdom of God. I'm there to help. Yeah.
Yes. It was, again, a wonderful opportunity
Yeah.
and an opportunity to minister. We had actually purchased almost 100 small wooden crosses and kept them in our pocket in case any refugees whispered to us that they wanted a cross, and many did.
Yeah.
Even though they were Muslims. We had only encountered 2 Muslim groups when we were there that were providing service. One of them, I believe, was the Green Gate, maybe, from London, and another one, Islamic Relief, the Islamic Relief Organization, which was working with IRC, the International Rescue Committee, on a Station 1 stop. Station 1 is basically where you get care as soon as you get off of those terrible boats.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we then heard from these Christian groups that Victoria Square was the place to go. So the way that we navigated our very loose mandate was we spoke to other Christians that had been there for a long time,
Yeah.
other volunteers, and made our way. We made our way to Victoria Square, and in this picture are Moroccan and Algerian refugees, which are considered economic refugees. So they don't have a priority in terms of who the United Nations moves on to settle in Germany and Austria, who were the only countries opening their doors at the time. We befriended these young men. They tried to go to Idomeni, which is the next stop that refugees would get to by bus. It was on the border with Macedonia. And once they got there, they suffered a lot of abuse and were sent back to Victoria Square. But they kept trying because, as you know, Morocco and Algeria is a closed country, and they didn't have much help there. One of these young men I overheard him tell another young man, look, only Christians are helping us. Our own Muslims are not here helping us. And his friend tried to shush him like, oh, it's all right, or maybe they're sending money or something. And the young man insisted to his friend, no, there are no Muslims helping us as Muslims. It's only the Christians.
Right.
And we won some of them over that way to help us to clean Victoria Square.
Yeah, they said that in Saudi Arabia there is 1 million tents in the desert used once a year for a few days during the Hajj season, they could have accommodated all of these refugees,
That's right.
at least for a few months,
Yes.
until settlement can happen, but that didn't occur.
Correct.
And that brings something about Saudi Arabia, if
Sure.
I may
Please.
interject here, that Saudi Arabia, that was 2 years ago, when Saudi Arabia washed its hands from helping the refugees, or give only lip service, or some money here, some money there, but not as much as it could have happened, as
Yes.
much as it could have helped. It could have actually accommodated the entire, or at least 50%, 20%.
That's right.
But the crisis was shipped to Europe.
Correct.
Okay. We'll talk spiritual meaning here now, that Saudi Arabia is undergoing tremendous change.
Yes.
And one important change that we cannot explain all the changes now, and the viewers, of course, know about it. But an important change that happened in the last 2 days was the visit by the Crown Prince Mohammed ibn Salman to His Holiness Pope Tawadros II in Cairo, in his residency, along with a big delegation. And we got the video because I'm curious to know, to listen to your analysis about this event and connecting it with the global picture and also the regional picture of what is the evolution of Saudi Arabia going, and why, not why, but perhaps what's your interpretation of the Crown Prince's positive move toward Christians in Egypt, represented by His Holiness Pope Tawadros, and let alone that about 2-3 months ago, he invited the Maronite Patriarch to Saudi Arabia. So let us watch this video about this meeting between His Holiness and the Prince.
ولي العهد السعودي الأمير محمد بن سلمان التقى في الكاتدرائية المرقصية بالعباسية بابا الإسكندرية تاودروس الثاني وبطريرك الكنيسة القبطية الأرثوذكسية بعد لقائه الإمام الأكبر في مشيخة الأزهر.
تحدث سمو الأمير كثيرا عن محبته للأقباط وعن هذه العلاقات الطيبة، وذكرنا أن نيافة الأنبا مرقس أسقف شبرا خيمة قد زار السعودية 3 مرات سابقا، فكرر سمو الأمير الدعوة له أيضا زيارة، بل قدم هذه الدعوة للجميع. نحن في الكنيسة نرحب بمثل هذه الزيارات ونقدم التحية كاملة إلى الشعب السعودي وإلى جلالة الملك وإلى أيضا الوفد الذي رافق.
What do you think? Did you imagine this 6 months ago?
No.
10
No,
years ago?
Not even 10 years ago. I think that given this crisis,
Yes.
and given the rise and now the ups and downs with ISIS in the region, losing 2 of, major countries like Iraq and Syria over the years, it's time for, and the Crown Prince knows this, time for change in the Middle East. And change has to come from his country. So in that regard, what he's doing is incredible. At the same time, it's politics, and politics is unpredictable. So we have to see just how much a reformist of this magnitude can affect change when he heads one of the most conservative countries in the region, and one that we all know manufactures terrorism,
Yes.
of which the Copts are on the receiving end, being still in their own country, as opposed to the refugees that had to flee.
Yeah.
And I think the Crown Prince is aware of something incredibly important, that his youth in Saudi Arabia are among the top users of social media in the region, which means they have access. They know what life is like outside of Saudi Arabia. Also, many of them, a vast majority, are educated in the West. They come to Harvard, they come to Stanford, some of our Ivy League schools. They go back with that knowledge, and they know what things can be like. There is no way that once you give them that kind of access that you can go backwards. He knows what he's trying to do is major, but he also knows you can't regress. Even if he goes, it has to continue. The momentum has to continue. To what extent is yet to be seen.
Do you think he's moving too fast?
I think what he's trying to do is what leaders do when given a powerful position in the beginning. Even if you were to become, promoted to boss, you want to set a precedent, you want to set boundaries and a perception of who you are as a leader. And so you come in strong. Mm-hmm. And you let people know this is your agenda, how you want to be treated and how they will be treated, and what your plan is. And we know that the Crown Prince has made it clear, you're either on board or you're not. Yeah. When he put everyone under house arrest at the Ritz or the Four Seasons, right? So you're either on board with me or you're not. And if you want to get out, the only way out is to be on board with me. And so the Prince is really setting the foundation for how things are going to go. Might he slow down later on because he does face resistance? He might. But this is an excellent way to start.
You're right. Yeah. Do you think the change in Muslim mind, represented by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, somewhat is a ripple effect or chain reaction to Christians doing good to Muslims, even though there is Muslim violence against Christians? Maybe I'm doing a shorthand or too much summarization in a short statement, but you know what I mean.
I do.
Like when they say good karma, like what goes around comes around.
Yeah.
That this is a Christian way. Like the early Christians, they fed their persecutors, like Saint Pachomius. We know that he was pagan and he was killing Christians, but he got tired of killing Christians, so he wanted to rest for the night, and the Christians fed him and his soldiers and said, okay, we'll feed you, we'll comfort you today so you can kill us tomorrow. And that story led him to believe in Christianity and stimulated his curiosity about this kind of religion. Do you think this is happening today? Not necessarily conversion to Christianity, but at least let us put the sword aside.
Yes.
And have a civilized interaction and collaboration between Christians and Muslims.
Yes. I think that even if it's not admitted by the Crown Prince openly or by Muslims openly, they're certainly aware of who is taking care of their people. Right. They're certainly aware of the behavior of non-Muslims towards Muslims in their country. Okay? And when there is help, I mean, there's often violence by Christians towards Muslims in Europe, but the people who are caring for the refugees and taking in the refugees are Christians. Right. And so it's in the back of their minds. It's represented in what the young man said to his friend. They know it. And the Crown Prince and many Muslim leaders know that this has gotten too far and that their people are suffering as a result of the backlash of groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all of these groups, and that if they have a chance in the modern world, then they need to start curbing things on their end. I learned a great deal from training Saudi women to run for office when I lived in Jordan. Yeah. They're brilliant. Yes. They have fantastic ideas. They just don't have room to move. The people are also aware that their country manufactures terrorism. So they are also exhausted themselves of the perception of Muslims, of the interpretations, these extreme interpretations, and what is happening to their people in terms of having to flee their countries. And so the people themselves will, upon seeing the Crown Prince and other leaders opening the door more, they will support them over time. because they themselves have always been aware. They just might be fearful of major change at first, but they will back them because the people themselves are also exhausted and ready to join everyone else.
Right, yeah. And they have the roadmap, as you said, many of them, or a good number, came to the West to be educated and went back.
Yeah.
And even the Saudi universities and colleges are taught by foreign professors.
That's right.
And so on, and the social media, etc. So did you are you done your trip in Greece?
I just wanted to show you a couple of more pictures so you see the faces of the refugees.
Yes,
and then we
please.
can move on to Serbia and France where you can see some of the Egyptian refugees we met.
Okay, I'm curious.
Sure. So I'll just move through these pictures quickly. This one is a young man who was crouched in Victoria Square. Of course, coming from the Middle East, many are not used to the extreme cold and snow. Many were very cold, and one of the services we did was we made agreements with store owners to sell us gloves, beanies, jackets at a very, very low cost so we could distribute them, and that was one of the ways in which we used the generous donations. The next picture is this is how they would sleep in Victoria Square. In the snow, you need a lot more than what these young men had. They would wake up sick, and Nahed and Giselle would walk them to about 2 miles every day to the nearest clinic if someone needed medical help. And there were clinics that the Greeks kept open on the weekends to help the refugees. And they were really short-staffed, their supplies were low, but they did it anyway, which was an incredible feat by the Greeks themselves, considering the country is 97% Greek Orthodox. This was an Afghani mother we met. She didn't have any diapers. When I picked up her child, he'd been wearing the same diaper for a week. It had hardened underneath him. He'd developed a rash, so we needed to go out and buy supplies as well. These are young girls that we met, Afghan refugees as well, hoping that they would have a chance moving on. Some young girls we met as well. And something I want to point out is these young girls are dressed well. People have this idea that the refugees are all poor. We met some wealthy refugees. They just needed to get out overnight. And the money they have in their pocket is all they have. Many of them were mugged. Their money was stolen from them. They were beaten. And so they couldn't just go put themselves up in a nice hotel. They needed to hang on to what they had because the journey is long and it lasts many years. In this next picture, we met gypsy children that were also fleeing. Many of them didn't have parents, which was unfortunate. And so the Greek government tried to open up camps just for the children and take them in. This is another Syrian refugee family camped out, hoping to get to Idomeni to cross to Macedonia and continue their trip up over to Germany. There were many elderly refugees, such as this man. Sadly, in Moria, we met an elderly refugee whose family had to leave him behind. He didn't have the energy to continue. And that was very heartbreaking because he had to leave everything he'd ever known. Then he was left in a country where he didn't speak the language, didn't have the health to help himself or to work, and would pretty much pass there. He would pass away there and never see his family again. It was a massive sacrifice by the elderly refugees. In Victoria Square, when European groups came to serve food, we had massive lines of men, and Nahed would try to organize them by speaking all 3 languages, Arabic and Farsi and, and Kurdish, just to try and organize the men because they were literally starving, many of them young men, and that was something that was done nightly. And here was one of the services that Nahed had done for a young Moroccan man. He had torn his jacket trying to jump the fence to Macedonia, and he had torn it. And we said, we'll get you another jacket. And he said, no, my mother gave me this before I left. I need to keep it. So Nahed sat in the cold and sewed it for her. And after that, he was just at her service. He called her Mama Nahed. And it was just a beautiful way to minister to a young man who didn't have anything. But felt this kind of motherly love from Nahed without telling him, you need to be Christian or, to make any demands on him spiritually. This is another service we did. The young man on the right is from Algeria, I believe. He's the one that made the comment that, look, Christians are helping us. There are no Muslims helping us. So when we asked to clean, he joined us. The man in the lower left is actually a Copt who was visiting Greece on his own. We met him just walking along the Parthenon one day, the base of the Parthenon, and he asked us where something was, and I noticed by his accent that he was Egyptian. So we asked, his name was George, and he joined us the rest of the trip serving refugees. He abandoned visiting any sites. It was his vacation just to come serve with us, which was, of course, humbling. In the next picture, the Tassoni that was working with us, the Greek presbytera, she brought some of the women from her church, and one night there were no groups to serve food in the square, so we went and used some of the donations to buy bread, cheese, and bananas. We made sandwiches. A Georgian Christian baker opened up his bakery late at night and let us make food, because many of the refugees got to know us who were in the square, and many of them would come to me and say, my sister, ya ukhti, ana ga'an, you know, I'm hungry. And so we'd find ways to feed them, because things can get violent when young men are not fed and sleeping in the cold.
Yeah. I was hungry and you fed me.
Yes.
I can always repeat this 10 times during this conversation.
It's true.
To remind us of Christ's words. And the great thing, Christ's word found good soil and was planted.
Yes.
And was fruitful. Yeah.
I'm going to, for time's sake, I am going to bring us to a really important part of Greece, which was the many Persian converts that we met. There were many underground churches in Greece, and we found out about one of them again through the many contacts we made along the way as God opened doors for us. And some of these men, Persian men, Iranians, had converted and then become ministers. So many of them are Protestant, all of them were Protestant, and the Orthodox churches would give them the basement to pray. And in the next picture, you'll see this is a Greek Protestant minister who would pray in Greek, and then the woman on the left would translate to Farsi. And the man whose red shirt you see had actually been ordained a minister by the Protestant church, and they would use homes of Greeks that would let them pray there, because it was too dangerous to let the other Muslim refugees know that they had converted, because some of them, like you said, became violent. Right. There was a Pakistani Muslim man who tried to attack his Iranian convert roommate because he'd heard he had converted. So it was a very dangerous situation, but there were many of these churches. The Iranians are converting at a very rapid rate.
Yeah, if I may make a comment here, that
sure.
Even in the last 15 years, even in Los Angeles,
yes.
there are strong Iranian conversion
yes.
to Christianity. Mm-hmm. And their churches in Los Angeles are filled, and in San Francisco, and unbelievable numbers of people. And you go to YouTube and you watch videos about underground Iranian communities, Christian communities underground in Turkey.
Yes.
And in Greece, as you are showing us, it's another phenomena, but I just wanted to say that it's worldwide for Iranians.
Yes.
For a particular reason that it's amazing.
Yes.
And even inside Iran.
Yes.
Underground,
inside Iran.
And they get persecuted.
Yes.
And for them to believe in Christ and declare it and put their neck under the sword, that is a testimony of their genuine faith.
Yes, and very humbling for us, because I'll never have to do that. Yeah. You know, even though I was born in Egypt, I was raised in America, I will never understand this.
Yes.
In this next picture is a young man, a man actually my age that I met. He converted to Christianity in Iran. He was a university professor. His wife's family found out that he had converted. Her brothers came after him. He had to flee. He will no longer be able to see his 8-year-old daughter. And he sacrificed all of that to be a Christian, which is marvelous, because I will never understand. He stayed with us and translated and spoke with Iranian refugees with Nahed. They would go around and speak Farsi to them and try to help them. And this was his ministry. And he has a daughter, and he had a life, and he was a professor, and he's educated. And he left everything behind and could never go back. By the time we returned, he had been given asylum in Greece, thank God. But these are the stories that just humble you.
It's humbling.
Incredible. It's
humbling.
Incredible.
I feel so small.
Yes.
And and I look as if I wasted half of my time, of my life in the wrong, something doing wrong,
Right.
compared to these people who really sold everything, including their very existence. It's an
Yes.
existential sacrifice,
Yes.
and to gain Christ. It's amazing. It's a testimony also of that Christ is the Son of God, and that the Christian faith, these people have some mystical energy, right? Mysterious faith, unbelievable to bear that pain.
Yes.
Yeah,
To go from having the prestige of being a PhD in your country
right.
and what is a strict Muslim country, to go to a country where you're not wanted, you're seen as a nuisance and a burden, and you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, and you try to pick up any kind of work and hope that country will accept you, is massive. It's unfathomable to me, but
right.
that's what these people did.
Yeah.
So there are just two last pictures before we move on to Serbia of other Persian converts we met. Nehed had encountered these 4 men on the island of Lesbos, and after talking to them for a bit, they told her that they were Christian. She told them she was a convert. They told her that they were Christian, and they wanted to stay in a Christian country, no matter what European country. They just wanted to be there so they could be Christian, and they're young men. They could, I mean, they had everything. They're Muslim young men in Iran. They could have built a life for themselves there, but they said, no, we're going to leave at 20, 21, 24 and go and build a life somewhere else, because that's how much we want Christ.
Right. Yeah, Iran is not exporting refugees.
No.
These are their own choice.
That's right.
They converted while they were in Iran, then they found violence against them, they fled. So they created trouble for themselves.
Correct.
But they gained Christianity in that they believe in it. That's amazing. Before you move to other countries,
Sure.
If we are done with Greece,
Yes. for the most part.
because we are during Lent now, I wanted to have a break where we watch St. Kirill Choir in London present to us the liturgical hymn Megalo Archi Erefs, which translates the great high priest, that's Christ, the pure, the great high priest forever, the pure, holy God. So let us watch St. Kirill Choir, which is sung in the church during Lent after the reading of the Synaxarion as an introduction to the usual liturgical hymn, Agios o Theos. A beautiful, beautiful song for the Lent, and a nice liturgical hymn. Megalo archi irefs, Iestos eones akranton agios otheos, the great high priest forever, the pure, most holy God. You enlightened us today about the interaction between Muslims and Christians. We can see it in other occasions, Muslims helping Christians who are either refugees or in any kind of need or trouble. We have seen it in both directions. And that, as you mentioned, it's an opportunity to gain the kingdom of God. And people can take it or leave it. But it is the Christian and Christ's promise and being Christ-like. Whether one is Muslim or Christian.
Yes.
And the concert that we just watched, part of it now, the chief violinist is Muslim.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And he, not only that he played as chief violinist, but also he listened to the tunes of the hymn and wrote the musical notes because he's a professor of music. Mm-hmm. So, and he did all of this for free.
God bless him. Wow.
God bless him.
Yeah.
And he did it for free, passionately. And he remained Muslim, but he is engaged in Coptic music by invitation. He did not plan it, just the Dr. Michael Hinain, who established this choir, invited him. He was looking for a music professor to write the music notes in the music language, and he heard about Mr. Osama Fathi and approached him. While Dr. Michael Hinain lives in London and Mr. Osama Fathi lives in Germany,
yes.
They communicated, they met, they started the project 5-6 years ago, mm-hmm. and you get this product.
It's beautiful.
Isn't that amazing?
It is.
So we exist in the relationship. Yes. My Muslim neighbor, whether he's good or bad, is giving me an opportunity to earn the kingdom of God.
Yes.
If he is good, it's a good fellowship in humanity and as children of God. If he is not so good, I'm earning the praise of Christ. I was hungry and you fed me spiritually or physically or mentally or in whatever way by the not so good behavior coming from any religion, Muslim or Christian or fellow Copt, but I am responding in the Christ-like way. And that's what you have been showing us. Mm-hmm. So now we are moving from Greece to
Serbia.
What? Serbia.
Yes.
The last country in the world I expect to be kind to foreigners just because of they may be the best people on earth, but their fight with Croatia like 10-15 years ago was unbelievably cruel.
Yes.
And they killed each other.
Yes.
While Croatia were Catholics and Serbia were Orthodox, they fought each other badly.
They fought, we do have to admit, Serbia being Christian, attacked, unprovoked, attacked Bosnia, which is predominantly Muslim.
Right.
And they were not provoked by Bosnia, and it was one of the worst wars in my lifetime.
Right.
At least. I think I was just starting college at the time.
Okay.
And we know Sarajevo was a massacre, massive deaths and rapes in unprecedented numbers.
So what happened? Now they are taking refugees. So what's the status? Show us.
I don't know that they, many of them were not treated very well. And Serbia was really a passing point to try and get to, again, Croatia, so then you could get into Germany and Austria,
Right. Okay.
and some escaped to Hungary, like many of the Egyptians. We had heard from other volunteers that the refugee crisis had spilled over into Serbia. And so Nahed stayed and worked with the Salvation Army in Greece to build up a place where refugees could go get clothes and other donations. And Giselle and I continued on to Serbia, having no idea what we would do when we get there. So we started off in Dimitrovgrad, which was terribly cold, and it's where many Afghani and Pakistani refugees would be on foot in the snow from their countries until they made it to Bulgaria, which is also Christian. They were abused very badly by the Bulgarians, who did not want Muslims in their countries. They shot at them with pellets, they took their possessions, they sicked dogs on them to attack them. And so they would sneak over to Dimitrovgrad. It was -22, like nothing I've ever experienced, where they were then taken advantage of by Serbian taxi drivers, the mafia, who knew that they were trying to get to Belgrade, the capital. And so we spent some time in Dimitrovgrad and then made our way to Belgrade. And so in this next picture, we met a group of Serbian volunteers. There was very little money going to support the refugee crisis. The Red Cross and the Salvation Army were doing as much as they could, but very few resources were going to Serbia, and these people, who I call Serbian Orthodox angels, we had met in front of the Office of the Ministry of the Interior, where we met very devastated Syrian refugees who had seen people die in the ocean, and were waiting to get any sort of papers. The law was that they could be in Serbia 72 hours and then they had to get out. They had no status after that. So in the next picture...
So you met good Serbians and,
yes.
and not so good Serbians?
Yes.
Okay.
Mostly good Serbians. And these people were angels. They were spending all day, every day, serving the refugees.
So we cannot stereotype the Serbians and say X, Y, Z. You saw angels, Serbian angels, serving Muslim refugees as much as they can. I mean, it's all volunteer work.
And one of these women, her fiance was actually an iconographer. And so we went and we saw his work at the school, art school, where he was studying. And so it was really beautiful, and they showed us around their churches and their cathedrals. And so we saw Serbian Orthodoxy in its land, which was amazing. So moving to Belgrade, once we had met these people, in this next picture, these angels had helped these young Afghani men. The Serbian mafia were stealing their papers, and that they had their birth certificates, and changing the name and selling it to refugees with money. So then these young men didn't have status and would get timed out of the 72 hours. So while we would help get them food and clothing, the volunteers would take them to the police office and sit with them for hours until they could get them temporary papers in order to move on to Croatia. In the next picture, there was a day camp that we volunteered with, that they had set up with very little funds. And there was, Save the Children had a tent for children to draw, and it was a way of therapy for the child refugees. And one of them, in this picture he drew, he says 36 people died in Greece, from Greece to Turkey. So this poor child, having been totally, he was Moroccan, having been totally traumatized by the trip on the ocean, had created these pictures. There was this, in this next picture, a small tent where we served them tea every day. The camp was only open during the daytime. In this next picture, a Tunisian refugee who had been given asylum in Serbia was managing the area where they could get warm clothes. This was all we could really offer them. So during the daytime, we would be there. Giselle would play soccer with them. We'd help the kids draw pictures, and we'd give them tea and warm clothes. And on many occasions, we used, again, the generous donations to get sandwiches to feed them, because once that camp closed, there was no food. In this next picture, will be a group that's of interest to viewers. There were many Egyptian refugees who were considered economic refugees, and their route was a very dangerous route. They would go from Egypt to Libya, which is worse, go through the desert of Egypt into Libya up to the port, And then from there, they would pay smugglers to take them across the ocean to Italy. When we were in Serbia, we saw many Italian smugglers that were there with unmarked vans, offering to take these people to different parts of Europe where they could get asylum. We met these 6 men who had suffered a great deal. Young men suffered a great deal in Egypt after the revolution. And again, we took the donations and bought them sleeping bags. Because in the next picture, many of them were sleeping in these conditions at the train station, waiting to take the train to the border with Croatia. So we helped buy some of the families' tickets to get on the train, sleeping bags so they could sleep until the next train came along. In the next picture is a Syrian refugee family. And what I want to point out is a moment that was humbling to me. They're Muslim. So going back to your point about what we could gain also spiritually from our Muslim neighbors and brothers and sisters. We were walking to the camp, the day camp, and one of the young men, I said, look over here in this area. The UAE, the Emirates, are building a new mall and homes while all of you are here suffering and you're not getting a penny from the Emirates. The Serbians are scrounging to give you a place to stay. What do you think? And he said, I don't care about them and what they're doing. I have God. إحنا معنا Allah. And it was very humbling because here I was trying to have this heated debate with him. And what matters to a refugee, all that refugees have is each other and God. They don't know if they're going to have a meal, warm clothes. Their shoes were stolen from them by other refugees as they were crossing in the snow. They're from Syria. Unless you're in the north, there's no snow. And so it was very humbling to hear from him, yes, we have God. We just manage on and rely on him, not on the politics of these countries, no matter who their leaders are. And they were just a beautiful family. They were all siblings and they had to flee. In the next picture, the only way we would help get some of them, they had terrible colds, chest conditions, hypothermia. There was a Pakistani doctor who had this van and would offer them medical services, and we try and get them to him to treat them before they got on the train to go up to Croatia. This was the train that we would help them off of. We tried to make it speak to them in their language. We would each take a door and speak to them in their language to try and get them away from taxi drivers that were trying to take their money from them. It was a difficult night.
Wow, that's a battlefield.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes. They suffer a lot of abuse.
Wow. But the volunteers like you also suffered because you had to be in between.
Yes. And the Serbian volunteers, these angels that we'd met, what they would do is make a ring around us. And as we were calling the refugees off of the train, they would face off with the taxi drivers who were angry with us. And they would shout at them and curse at them in Serbian. And they would deal with that so that we were safe enough to get the refugees off of the train, get them medical care, get them tea, get them something before we got them on the next train. And in the next picture was this is the last picture I have for Serbia, excuse me. It's a Yazidi refugee family. You had many Yazidis who we know were the first group to be attacked by ISIS in Mosul. They were the first target, and they had fled into the Sinjar Mountains. Many of them died along the way. This was a family of 11 that were trying to make their way through Croatia and build a life in Germany, because there was no room for the Yazidis at this point in Iraq. So that was our experience in Serbia. I can move on to France.
Yes, please. Yes, okay. Let us do that. We have 12 minutes.
Okay, I will move through it quickly. France, we had then heard while we were in Serbia that there was a part in the north of France, in a city called Calais, that there was an area there created by refugees called the jungle.
Calais is on the English Channel,
correct,
facing England.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the goal of all of these refugees was to try and cross the Channel to get into England. France had refused to work with the United Nations to offer any services to these refugees. They wanted them out of France. And so they created their own camp in the north and were abused very badly by the French police and were quite dependent on volunteers. It wasn't a safe place to be, but we felt it was important that Giselle and I go and assess what Servant Group International could do for these refugees. So we found many English volunteers who, out of the great kindness of their hearts, were sleeping in very cold conditions and had left their jobs just to help the refugees. So
in France?
In France.
Wow.
So there were two major warehouses. We helped in one of them. The warehouses were massive. What you see in this picture is an area where people sorted through clothes, sorted the clothes by gender, by size.
Yes.
And it was a massive undertaking. And this next picture is me. I am cutting towels into small pieces to create the hygiene kits that you see in this picture. I created hygiene kits for men and for women, and it was distributed to them with deodorant and razors and toothbrushes and so on. In this picture, there are the kind volunteers that would sit and make hot meals to distribute to the refugees. And there were also groups that would package what you see in this picture, staples, rice and oil, that we also distributed so that the people could have something to make while they were in the camps, because it's unsustainable to prepare meals for them every day. There were some very dangerous situations with this, where in the Sudanese part of the camp, since many of them are Muslim and they speak Arabic, I went with another man, Gabriel, to distribute the food, and the people were so hungry, Gabriel and I were pinned against the wall by a large group of men trying to get the staples for themselves, because the people, you can't blame them, they're starving. But those were the conditions in the jungle, and you can't ask for help because the police didn't want to help. In this next picture is a map of the jungle.
But you're still alive.
By the grace of God.
Yeah.
By the grace of God.
Wow, that must. So you faced fear.
A lot of times,
Yeah.
yes. A lot of sadness too,
Yeah.
which I will come to at the end here.
Yeah.
I'll move through these very quickly.
Yeah.
This is a map of the jungle. The refugees had divided themselves by ethnic group or by country, and in the lower right there is the Syrians were next to the Egyptians. There were about 150 Egyptians that were in the jungle. We needed to go with other volunteers who had navigated the jungle. It was very hard to navigate. It was cold. It was wet. You can see in this picture the conditions in mud. In the next one are volunteers trying to get through. The way you knew to navigate the jungle was by the flags, the country flags. You can see they were living in tents and in a lot of waste and rubbish. That stream you see in the picture is actually from the bathrooms that had overflowed into the camp, so you can tell there were a lot of disease. This was how they cooked. At the same time, there were churches and mosques that were built in the jungle with the help of English volunteers. This is an Ethiopian Orthodox church that we were led into once we said we were Orthodox, and it was really beautiful and really comforting to go there. There were many Ethiopian refugees there, because you know Ethiopia is facing also a drought, a major drought. This is a Catholic priest who wanted to go unnamed, that would go through and was also trying to get a group of nuns together to help to serve the refugees. Nahed had decided to eventually go and serve with them later on. Doctors Without Borders was there. We helped them to give measles immunization to the refugees. Because many of them were sick. We couldn't take pictures of their faces because if they crossed to London or to England and their faces had been seen in any social media, they would say you should have stayed in France and asked for asylum there, not here. So you won't see any faces of any of the young men we met. Many of them had been beaten by the police, sent back at every attempt they tried to make. In that picture where they're getting a shot, there was this wonderful French Catholic retired doctor who was giving the immunization, and in her free time, when she's not serving the refugees, she's sewing frocks for Catholic nuns in France. And she was a wonderful woman to meet. These are the last few pictures. This was the most difficult part of the trip for me. There were many emotionally difficult times, but the most difficult were the children whose families couldn't give them anything and they had to flee on their own. If we could go back to the picture on the left, that young boy's name is Hussam, and he is Egyptian. On the right is Hamza, he's Moroccan. I met Hussam in the It's a very hard story for me to tell. I met him in the camp in the jungle. He's 12 years old. He was by himself. He had been taken in by other Egyptian refugees. There were very kind-hearted French lawyers that had set up legal counsel for refugees in the jungle. And one of the great opportunities France offered was that if you were under 18 years old, they would put you in a home, in a boys' or girls' home. You would be educated for free all the way through graduate school. So if you wanted to become a doctor like Hassan, and when you turned 18, they would give you citizenship automatically. And so I had what's called in humanitarian aid a rescue fantasy. Let's do this for all the children so they could be helped. I became very attached to Hassan. I spoke to his father in Egypt several times, who had lost his job after the revolution because there were no more tourists going to Sharm el-Sheikh. He had many children, and he believed the one that was most capable of building a life for himself anywhere was Hassan. So he sent Hassan to Libya and then on the boat to Europe. And he didn't know where he was. I talked to his father more than once, Muhammad, and we tried to convince Hassan to take asylum in France. He was resistant because he wanted to go to England. To him, England was the dream. And so the morning that, when he finally agreed, the morning that I went with the lawyers at 6 in the morning, Giselle and I went to go pick him up, he had disappeared. It was a really difficult night because I had been attached to the idea of helping him. I had promised his dad that I would help him. And so that was difficult. We were leaving on a train back to Greece that night. Then I went to Greece, and in Victoria Square I met Hamza, who's only 14, from Morocco, and again had these kind of rescue fantasies about I could pretend I'm his cousin and we could take him to France and get him asylum. But God reminds you that there's only so much you can do for people. These are his people, he will take care of them. But it was a very difficult time. And these last two pictures, to wrap things up, this is the French police eventually came in and bulldozed down the jungle, which was terrible. The people in the next picture had protested and said, we're not terrorists. Please don't kick us out. But eventually they had bulldozed the churches, the mosques, the legal council, the theater, where some of the British were doing performances to entertain, the gyms that had been built to keep the young men. You had many young men that were economic refugees, especially from North Africa, just looking for a chance in Europe. You had many young women from Haiti who had been forced into prostitution in Turkey and had taken advantage of the crisis to try and flee to Europe and build their lives. And it was all torn down by the French police, unfortunately, and many of those people scattered. I don't know what happened to Hassan or Hamza or anyone else, but I always pray that God took care of his children.
Wow, you met Christ. You met Christ in what, 2 months? All what you showed us today was over about 2 months.
Correct.
In Europe, in Greece, Serbia,
France.
And France, 3 countries. And you met Christ, and you heard the calling for you to go and do this. And the way I heard you is that if you have not gone, there would be a hole. There would be services not done. You and other volunteers. I mean, suppose all volunteers disappear, did not go. These refugees will be in a terrible, terrible stage.
Yes.
So you really, God, you employed you.
Yes.
To be his ambassadors, his servants, his fingers. God used you as his own fingers in doing good, and the results were tremendous. I mean, he said 1 glass of cold water will not go unrewarded, right? So even presenting a glass of water is something that Heavenly Father will reward, and that's his promise. So God bless you and all volunteers. You enlightened us. And that's when Christ spoke about you are the light of the world, you are the salt of the earth, you are in a city on a hill. It's really comforting and encouraging to look at this life experience that is of great magnitude. Maybe my comments will reduce from the strength and value of what you have told us today. So I'm not going to make more comments because I'm speechless, really. I'm definitely speechless. Thank you so much for presenting this to us. May I ask you for a concluding remark?
Sure. I want to say that, you know, God definitely uses us as instruments.
Yes.
Even if I had not gone, there would have been someone to do his work. These are his children. And I learned a great deal from being there, more than anything else, because this crisis is massive. I mean, it's a crisis.
Yes.
We did as much as we could, and God would take care of his children with or without me. I also want to give credit to the people who donated to us. There were many Copts who were incredibly generous, and I hope they got to watch and see what happened with the funds they gave. But I do want to say that it's important to keep our ears open and our hearts open to whatever Christ's calling is for us in terms of serving the world. You can serve people here. In Los Angeles, we have the worst homelessness crisis in the country. That's important. That's serving your neighbor. There are many. You have Texas where you can go and volunteer. Puerto Rico, a U.S. territory where you can go and volunteer. You can give money, because without money, this would not happen.
Yes.
Without people going through their closets, without people caring, without people being unafraid to hear what's happening and to react. But to always keep our hearts open, because you never know what Christ wants from you and what there is that you can learn that will lead to your salvation, because ultimately that's the goal. He will save you and them, but the point is, like St. Anthony says, you cannot be saved without your brother. And so wherever you can be of help, that's what you need to look for.
You cannot be saved without your brother, St. Anthony of Egypt.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
And if I may conclude with the words of the Holy Spirit in the epistle to the Ephesians, chapter 2, verse 10. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. And Christ said, whatever you did for my little brethren, you did for me. Yes. And therefore, come to me. You are blessed of my Father. Come, inherit the kingdom of heaven. Again, thank you.
Thank you. Glory to God in all things. Thank you.
Yes. Our viewers, thank you for watching Coptic Civilization. This episode has been with Suzie Abdou. Thank you again. And the topic was serving refugees in Europe. See you on the first Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m. Los Angeles time. I'm so grateful to the the Logos TV crew who served today and presented this fantastic technology and logistics and camera and sound and every good thing. God bless them. And also invite you, our dear viewers, to donate to Logos TV. Please write the number on the screen and the website, logoschannel.com. The telephone number 818-342-3388. Please call now, anytime 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Los Angeles time, or go to the website and make a donation, or on the phone, either way, by Visa card or bank transfer, and make a monthly deduction from your Visa card or bank account as a donation to Logos TV, the missionary church on the air that serves the world 24/7 and reaches beyond national and international boundaries, reach to needy people around the earth. As Suzie said, without money, what can you offer people? You need to buy food. You need also to buy satellite time and other expenses. Thank you for watching. I'm honored to be in your home via Logos TV. God bless you. I'm Michael Saad.